Introducing National Streaming Sports, live and on-demand sports talk programming that you can access 24/7. Check us out on YouTube, Facebook, and X. And for the premier sports talk experience, tap into our Roku channel. Start your mornings with Mac and Jack covering all the weekend sports action. Then pour a cup and enjoy all the sports you can drink on the Coffee and Sports podcast. At midday, talk sports from east to west on the Coast to Coast podcast. Followed at night by some hot girl talk with Prim and Proper Sports featuring Sonia Pearson. Talk boxing on the Gloved Fist. Yankee fans tune in for Start Spreading the News. And there's more on the College Sports Huddle and Sports Scope with Robert Butler. And that's just a sampling. There are 20 podcasts in all and 70 weekly shows giving us a 3.4-star viewer rating. To find us on Roku TV, search for National Streaming Sports on the Roku search bar. Click on the logo and you're in. For laptops, mobile phones, and tablets, download the Roku app. National Streaming Sports, live and on-demand sports talk for America.
This show is brought to you by BetUS.com. 125% off your first 3 deposits, 30 years experience, secure site, wagering for all sports, including during the games and futures. SeatGeek provides you the best prices on sports and music events, game tickets, and concerts. Use NSS promo code to get $20 off your first ticket. Keep using the NSS promo code when purchasing tickets for great deals in the future. In Fanatics at nessp.info for your favorite teams, sportswear. Click on the link, and while you're there, check out our national streaming sports merchandise. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sports Memory Show. I'm your host, Mac, with your co-host, Jack Hirsch and James Martin, here to go over the sports history, the history in the sports that makes today's sports what they are, and of course will affect the future of sports in one way or another. So today we got a lot of interesting topics for you today. We've got a little bit about NBA great, some boxing, a major league, professional baseball, I should say, and we'll finish off if we got time with Roger the Dodger himself, Roger Staubach of the Dallas Cowboys. But first, we have our up and coming star here, James J Train, who will for our network. He's an upcoming star. I mean, he's learning a lot here in sports memory. He's on a lot of shows, becoming quite the expert in a lot of things. So let's start off with James. And James, you got an NBA great for us, Bill Walton. Very interesting character and a great center.
Mac, thank you for that introduction, man. I appreciate that a lot. But I feel I'm embarrassed because of all the people that you've given me, everybody seems to have a nickname, and I couldn't find a nickname. All the research I've done on Bill Walton, I couldn't find a nickname for him, so I didn't see anything. But what I did learn about Bill Walton is that he was a great basketball player, and he was hampered by a lot of great injuries. Obviously, mostly his foot, bad foot injuries. And it's a question about what could have been. But let me tell you what he did do. Bill Walton started out in high school. He and his brother both were athletes. As a matter of fact, Bruce Walton was a tackle guard for the Dallas Cowboys. He ended up being. He played football for UCLA. But they both played basketball together early on in high school. And his big brother was overprotective of him because he was a lot smaller. He was shy. And he stuttered. He had a stuttering problem, so he's very shy. And so when they played basketball, this is just a little anecdote. One of the guys had been pushing up on Bill And Bruce didn't take it kindly to that. And so Bruce came up on the guy when he wasn't looking. He elbowed him in the chest and knocked him on the ground and said, "That's my brother you messing with." And after that, he hadn't had any problems out of anybody because the word got around who it was. But his junior and senior season in high school were phenomenal. Bill had his senior season, he averaged 29 points and 25 rebounds a game. And they won 49 between those 2 years, they won 49 consecutive games and 2 championships. And man, that was pretty impressive. This guy had already had experience. A lot of these young guys, when they're in high school, seem to be meeting up with some of these pro players. At the time, they were in San Diego. San Diego had the Rockets, the franchise team, the Rockets. Obviously, we know them as the Houston Rockets. They went there and sit back in Houston in '71. But he had the keys to the school, Helix High School, to the gym. And these guys didn't really have a regular facility, so they'd come there and play. And then he would have the keys, and they'd call him at his house, and he'd go play with people like Pat Riley, Jim. I forgot the guy's name. It was Rick Adelman and players like that would actually be there. Elvin Hayes and Calvin Murphy, players like that would be there, and people that were going to be coaches and players, and played in the NBA, of course. But man, after high school, he ended up going to. He was recruited heavily by the great John Wooden. After one of his recruiters came to see him and said, "Man, you got to see this kid. He's the best player in high school right now." And John didn't believe that until he went and saw him himself. And so they recruited him, and he went to UCLA. And at the time, UCLA was already a giant stalwart, winning NCAA finals already, championships. And so adding this player that was just a good all-around player, both defensively and offensively, would be great for their continued success. And so his freshman year, he averaged about 13 points, under 13 points and 13 rebounds. They go on to win the NCAA finals. Sophomore year, same thing. His sophomore year and junior year is when he really starts showing himself, and that team was just dominant. They go on a run that was probably unprecedented. That no one, I don't even know if anybody have that kind of stretch, but 88 games, man, just consecutive wins. That's just incredible, And they'd average like 20-point wins. They were dominant. They were averaging like 80 points a game versus their opponent 60 points a game, and he was just at the forefront. And of course, in his junior year, that was his best season, man. That was his best season. And they would go on again, undefeated, 30-0, and they played against Bobby Knight and the Indiana Hoosiers in the semifinals, and they beat them 70-59. And he scored about 14 points, 9 rebounds, and several assists in that game. But then they go on to play Memphis State in the finals, and that's arguably his best game ever in college. It was just, and they said that's one of the best games that college has seen. He scored. I think they were tied at 39-39 at the half. And then they just ran away with that game. They won like 80-66 or something like that. But he scored 21 of 22 shots. 40, he missed one shot. 44 points, X amount of 14 rebounds and 9 assists, I believe, something like that. And a couple of, 2 assists and 1 block. But that's still a record to this day for a NCAA finals at 44 points. And even the coach of the opposing team had to just give him credit where credit was due. Now, that same year, there's a little bit of controversy as well, because not only was he a great basketball player, but he was a bit of a political activist. He got arrested for a anti-Vietnam War protest. And the person that bailed him out was John Wooden. And he was just like, they didn't agree on their politics at all, but they obviously agreed enough to be, coach and basketball player. And he'd go on to say later on that John Wooden was always right about a lot of things that he told him, and that he was his mentor. Next to his parents, is probably the greatest person that, that was in his life. And he, until his death, of course, that was, somebody he listened to. But the senior year, they finally had to have a loss, and they lost to Notre Dame. They went on and lost, and the first time in a while, they lost consecutive games to Oregon and Oregon State. But they still will go on to the Final Four. They made it to the Final Four with a 26-4 record, and they lost to NC State. And he said that's probably one of his worst losses ever in whether college or basketball career. One of his greatest regrets is not being able to win in those games. And throughout these, even in his college years, he was still hampered by injuries as well. But they would lose in the semifinals to NC State, and he go on to the NBA, get drafted number 1 overall to Portland. And what's funny is that the ABA, 2 teams from the ABA tried to lure him in 73 and 74 to the ABA to get him in, and he wouldn't budge. So he went to Portland, had a couple of injury riddled seasons in the beginning, but then of course their dream season, the Cinderella season, was in 1977. He would go on to be all NBA defensive team and all NBA second team for Portland. And they go on to win the championship. And the crazy thing is, he was second in MVP voting, but the person that he lost to was the team that they swept. That was the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in the Western Conference Finals. And so they won a championship that year. The next year, he won MVP, and they had an opportunity. They got to the playoffs, but because of the injuries that he had, he got injured in that first series against the Supersonics, and they lost. And of course, from what I understand, with his injury, he didn't know how severe the injury was, and he was given some shots on his ankle, and there was more injury that led on when he had an X-ray on his foot. And he wasn't really happy with that, and wasn't really happy with how he and the players were treated medically, and he thought some things were unethical there. And so he sued the team later on, and he requested a trade. It didn't happen. So he sat out that 78-79 season and ended up with the San Diego. Man, how many teams does San Diego have? They had the Rockets and they had the Clippers.
Later on. An ABA team, the San Diego Conquistadors, too.
Yes. Absolutely.
Will Chamberlain actually coached them at one point.
He coached and played, right? Exactly. Yeah, and so and at the end of the day, San Diego has no basketball team at all now. And so, look, he go on and play for the Clippers, and it was just marred by injury, and they had no success. The Clippers obviously were pretty bad, and he left in '85, and he had a choice of who he wanted to go to. He wanted to go to a championship team, so he had a choice between the Lakers, and of course, Lakers and the Celtics were the big teams then. And so he said what swayed his decision was when he went to his interview process with Red Auerbach. Larry Bird came in and said, "Hey, look, if he feels like he's healthy enough to be on the court, that's good for me." And of course, with the Lakers, he had to go through medical clearance to get on the team, and so he chose the Celtics. And he had a rebound season. This guy was 32 years old, and you would think during the Clipper years, that's the prime of your career during that time. That's, for any man athlete, you're in your prime between age 27 to 31.
You mean the Trailblazers?
No. I'm saying he went to the Trailblazers early on in his career, but he left them in '79. He played for the San Diego Clippers, Los Angeles Clippers, 79-85. So yeah, and that's still his prime, because again, it's relatively a young man when you think about it. I mean, he's a big guy, 6'11", 210, but that's still pretty good, a young age. And so he bounced back. He averaged just under 8 points and about 6 rebounds, and he got 6th Man of the Year, backing up Robert Parrish and Kevin McHale. Yeah. So and of course they go on to win a championship. And then the next year, he couldn't get past those injuries, and collectively he retired. Collectively, He had 37 total surgeries, orthopedic surgeries spanning his 14-year career, and he would play a total of 468 games out of a possible 1,148 games. So he really missed a lot of playing time. So the question is, you look at all the things he's accomplished. He's two-time NBA champ, NBA Finals MVP. He's a couple of All-Stars, a couple of defensive, all in defensive teams, 6th man of the year. He led in rebounds. He led in blocking. His numbers retired 32, both in UCLA and in Portland. He's in the College Hall of Fame, and he's both in the NBA Hall of Fame as well. And he's a 3-time college player of the year from 72 to 74. But even saying that, with all those accolades, you look at all the different things that happened to him. The question is, what could have been even more so? He could have been even more dominant in his career, his NBA playing career, if it wasn't for those injuries. But considering what he did with the little amount of time he had, I consider him a great all-time great big man, especially the style of play that he did.
Well,
he 6,000 points, 4,000 rebounds, and 1,500 assists.
So before you push on to the broadcast, and I know Jack has something to say too. Question for both of you. I mean, listen. He maybe at peak value, he's one of the best, but does he belong in the Hall of Fame? I mean, those totals are not the greatest by any means. So, I mean, do you really believe that, as great as he was for that time, that he belongs in the NBA Hall of Fame?
Let me answer Jack first. I would say yes, because I mean, when he was at his peak, he was probably the best, if not one of the best. You know what I mean? And you look at someone like Terrell Davis, you would say, like, okay, Terrell Davis had a very short career. It was marred by knee injuries later in his career. But when he played during that short time, you can compare his numbers to people like Earl Campbell, Eric Dickerson. It was just up there. I mean, and he got 2 championships, and I would say one of them was on his back. One of them was definitely on his back. So, yeah, I mean, you could argue if a person said that he didn't belong, then fine. I can say that because of the numbers aren't there. But I mean, I think there's asterisks in different ways you have to look at it from, versus just like, okay, you played a short time, didn't play long enough, that kind of thing, or he just wasn't that good. No, I think he belongs. That's just my opinion.
You agree with that?
He was basically acknowledged as the best passing center of all time. Okay, and it might not seem that important, but it is. It adds up. Just like a baseball pitcher, if you say he's the best fielding pitcher of all time, you might think, well, how important is fielding? Or first baseman, if you think he's the best thrower, first baseman, it adds up over time. And if you look at some of the other guys who are in the NBA Hall of Fame, yeah, he belongs. I mean, he's better than a good number of guys who are in there. And as far, if you do it even a short time, but you're extremely dominant, I mean, if Ohtani stopped playing baseball, he probably gets in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Look at Sandy Koufax. He had a short window, didn't he? But he was so dominant and so great. I mean, he's in without, any serious discussion.
Well, see, the reason why I'm asking is he really had one great year, maybe 2. And Portland, you're right. He carried Portland to that championship. There's no doubt. He didn't carry Boston. He was an off the bench kind of player.
He was 6th man of the year. He was a very valuable contributor. You don't have to carry a team necessarily. So he showed that longevity in a certain sense. Even though he was injured, he survived to a point where he could contribute to a championship team. I'm a believer in body of work. If you look at what he did in college, and then had a little career as a broadcaster, he also had his sons involved, basketball. Luke Walton, a player who coached the Lakers, and I think Sacramento as well later on.
Yeah. So he did go on to become pretty good broadcaster. He got a couple awards, James.
Yeah, and also he overcame his stuttering issue to go on and do that. Yeah, which again, says a lot about the person as well. I mean, that drive was pretty strong to be great, whether it's basketball or commentating.
Well, he got into it with Larry Johnson at the Knicks. He criticized Larry Johnson, like his character in some ways. So Larry Johnson says, "Who's that pot smoking Bill Walton to, criticize me?" It wasn't popular smoking pot back in the day, but Bill Walton, was the pot smoker. So Larry Johnson kind of took a dig back at him.
Back then, I mean, he didn't. Most times, he wasn't dressed like a normal Bronco. He had tie-dye shirts on. He'd have the Grateful Dead, tour shirts on, and he was quite the character. I mean, like I said, he won the Dick Enberg Award. He won an Emmy in 2018. I mean, this guy became a fun part of basketball. There was him and his co-host, or co-commentator, I should say. We used to go back and forth all the time, and he was a funny guy. I mean, it made the game enjoyable. So, and Rick, good morning, Rick. He took his Celtics teammates to the concert. Can you imagine Larry Bird back there on a bong watching the concert? I can't imagine that. But anyway, it probably didn't happen.
Yeah. Even Kevin, he was a fun-loving guy. Even Kevin McHale said after the Celtics won the championship, when you called up Bill Walton to leave a voicemail, he go, "This is Bill Walton of the 1986 world champion Boston Celtics," and he left it on there like a couple of years or something. That voicemail.
Yeah, I mean, one of the fun guys in basketball. And you said a stuttering problem that he had since he was a kid. I think, didn't he go to school or some kind of some course he had to take, worked with somebody to get rid of that stuttering problem. I know a lot of people with stuttering problems, and it is very, very embarrassing and hard to get over. I mean, a lot of people just won't talk because they stutter. So it's a thing you got to overcome. So yeah, great job, James. And Richard, Rick, he agrees with me. There you go. See, I told you upcoming stuff. So we're going to boxing, and I gave this to Jack because I really don't know a lot about it. It's the beginning of the century, turn of the century boxing thing. And of course, there was a black color barrier back then with boxing. And there was no one else that I think could have handled this. Jack Hirsch, of course, was a boxer, a reporter, went behind the Iron Curtain to first reporter ever in boxing to get behind the Iron Curtain and talk and interview boxers. He was in jails interviewing boxers. I mean, 6-time former president of the National Boxing Writers Association, boxer himself. I mean, Jack is one of the main authorities in boxing to me in the country. So I'm glad I have him on the show with me. Not only do you know a lot about sports, but this is his wheelhouse. So I gave Jack this, and Jack said he'd give me something back on it. So Jack, what do you got on these boxers?
Yeah, boxing is considered the front runner as far as equal opportunity employment in the sport, but there was a lot of racial discrimination. Let's be honest about it. Boxing was a lot better than baseball, put it that way. Okay, at the beginning of the 1900s, there could be black champions as long as they were in heavyweight, because the heavyweight championship was considered the ultimate prize in all the sports. It was considered far more prestigious. Heavyweight champions in boxing and boxers in general until the 1970s and 1980s, they made a lot more money than any other athletes. For example, Jack Dempsey made far more money than Babe Ruth. It wasn't even close. Okay, to give you an idea, guys who were around the same time. But from 1882 to 1892, when the gloved era started with John L. Sullivan, even though he fought bare knuckle a little bit in the beginning of his championship reign, there was like the color line that John L. Sullivan drew. He said the one thing he won't do is give a black man a chance at the heavyweight championship. And he said it maybe with good reason, because in Australia, there was this black heavyweight named Peter Jackson who was absolutely outstanding. And he was a real threat to beat John L. Sullivan. So Sullivan maybe used that excuse, because it was convenient to avoid fighting Peter Jackson. Or more likely than not, Sullivan was also a blatant racist, as well. I guess a combination of the two things. So at the beginning of the 1900s, we did have black champions like the great bantamweight George Dixon. He'd be allowed to win a world title. But finally, in 1908, Jack Johnson got the opportunity. He traveled the world. He chased after Tommy Burns, an Australian, and a Canadian, excuse me. Tommy Burns was a really small guy, 5'7.5", shouldn't have been fighting heavyweight, very underrated, still made something like 8 heavyweight title defenses, despite a small size. Eventually, Jack Johnson chased him and they fought in Australia. Jack Johnson was just too big, too strong. And the fight was being filmed. In the 14th round, right before they stopped the fight, the police saw to it that the film was shut off. So we don't have any surviving film of when the fight was exactly stopped because they didn't want the moment on film where the smaller white guy was being beaten up by the bigger black guy, basically. So Jack Johnson was defending. He was champion from 1908 to 1915. In 1910, he had his defining fight of his career, one of the 3 biggest in boxing history when he defeated Jim Jeffries. Now, from an athletic standpoint, Johnson's victory over Jim Jeffries in the Great White Hope fight is completely overrated, completely from an athletic viewpoint. Johnson deserves very marginal credit. No one ever mentions Jim Jeffries was unbeaten, considered an invincible champion, retired at the age of 29. He came back after 6 years, fat and out of shape, and Johnson dominated the fight and stopped him in the 15th round. But no one ever talks about Jeffries' 6-year layoff from age 29 to 35. Yet they talk about Muhammad Ali being off his 3 years, and Ali came back to the ring when he was 29, 6 years before Jeffries. Ali's given a pass, Jeffries isn't, but whatever. So Johnson stops Jeffries, but it was the manner in which Jack Johnson defeated opponents that irked people, and I kind of get a kick out of this. Jack Johnson would taunt his white opponents. He'd have fun, and he'd taunt the crowd. This guy was the coolest cat ever. They'd have to check shotguns at the door when he fought Jim Jeffries in Reno, Nevada, July 4th, 1910.
Wow.
Yet Johnson in clinches would taunt Jeffries. He taunt Jeffries' corner, which consisted of former heavyweight champion Jim Corbett and all. And in Johnson's behavior really perturbed the white race. Had Jack Johnson been quiet and humble, a gentleman, whatever, he wouldn't have been popular, but he would have been tolerated. There's a difference. He would have been tolerated by the white society. That there wouldn't have been such a thing, like a great white hope like era. And the whole thing was find someone who could beat Jack Johnson, wipe the smile off his face, like the author Jack London said. And that's how they dug Jim Jeffries out of retirement. Jeffries never wanted to come back. But the pressure and the $100,000 payday, enormous at that time, 1910, convinced him to come back. But in the meantime, there were other black heavyweights. Jack Johnson did defend against one, in Jim Johnson in France, and they actually fought to a draw. 2 judges had it even, and one judge actually scored it for the challenger, that fight. But Jack Johnson, all in all, wasn't giving title shots to the worthy black fighters. And they were upset. They said, he fought us before I won the title. He's forgetting where he came from. This and that, but Jack Johnson, I guess, was doing his own thing. And also, it's important to point out that two black fighters wouldn't have been a big draw for business in that, in that era. It just, wasn't going to happen. So they had like a colored heavyweight championship, it was called, which historically doesn't mean a great deal. We know it existed. You had some good fighters like Joe Jeanette, Sam McVeigh, George Godfrey. You'd mentioned me outside the show, Max, Sam Langford. Sam Langford wasn't really a heavyweight. He was a great middleweight who fought heavyweights. He fought Johnson once early in Johnson's career. Johnson beat him reportedly decisively. But Langford was an all-time great, but a smaller guy. And so what had happened when Johnson lost the title in 1915 to Jess Willard, it was going to be a while before a black man was going to get a shot at the heavyweight title because the fear was there could be another Jack Johnson. Okay? Or like Muhammad Ali said years later, he was fascinated by Jack Johnson's conduct. He'd say, they say I'm bad, but that Jack Johnson, he was crazy. Like Ali was even like taken aback. I mean, I wouldn't be that bold as he, was to do the stuff that, that he did. But a decade after Johnson lost the title, there was this outstanding black heavyweight from New York, Harry Wills, nicknamed the Panther, quiet guy, a religious guy, humble, great fighter. He was clearly the top contender for Jack Dempsey's title, the heavyweight title. Jack Dempsey ducked him, flat out ducked him. Was it on Dempsey? Let's put it this way. Dempsey was willing to fight him, willing. But Dempsey's promoter, Tex Rickard, didn't want to take a chance in case Wills won, that it would ruin the heavyweight title. People wouldn't want to see a black man because they'd be thinking of Jack Johnson. So what happened? The New York State Athletic Commission would not allow, good for the commission, they wouldn't allow Jack Dempsey to fight Gene Tunney in New York. They told him, you have to fight Harry Wills. He's the #1 contender. So what they did, they took the Dempsey-Tunney fight to Philadelphia. Actually, it was good for the promotion. They drew something like 120,000 people there. It was crazy. And Dempsey lost the title there. And then, Tunney beat him in the controversial rematch, the long count. But Wills never got a shot at the title. But Wills did become a successful real estate broker. He bought properties in Harlem that time, would make, a lot of money. And Wills did get elected into the International Boxing Hall of Fame. He never seemed to hold a grudge against Dempsey. But I always hold that against Dempsey. If you're a real champion, you tell your promoter, so on, manager, no, I'm fighting this guy. I got to fight this guy. I realize it was the 1920s. Revisionist thinking is a bad thing a lot of cases, because it was a different era. If we use revisionist thinking, then we're going to be locking up 50% of the fathers who use the strap, to hit their kids. That was even encouraged during that time, to put the kid in line, But you do it in this day and age, you wind up in the court of law.
Jack, there were a lot of black. Well, let's put it this way: there weren't a lot of black fighters, so a lot of them fought each other like 3 or 4 times, right?
Yeah, great point, Mac. So those heavyweights back in the day, Jack Johnson's time, they continuously fight one another over and over and over. And fighters fought a lot more then, so you had to fight a lot more to make a living.
Right.
And that's what was it. If you were the champion, you could fight once in a while. You could pick your spots. But these other black fighters, they just had to fight to make a living. And it wasn't only the heavyweight title in the 1930s and the 1940s, okay? Especially in the 30s, there was this group called Murderers Row, Charlie Burley, Lloyd Marshall, Coleman Williams, fighters like that who weren't getting a title shot. I mean, but they all keep fighting one another. Now, few of them did eventually get a title shot. They escaped the murderous row thing, like an Archie Moore, Sugar Ray Robinson, I guess was so flamboyant and entertaining. He broke through and he eventually got to fight for the title. But even Archie Moore was delayed, when he would fight for the title. And it was a bit of a problem. I mean, and eventually that was outgrown. I mean, there wasn't a ban on the lighter weight divisions at any point, but it was much harder. Well, in the 1920s, for example, Tiger Flowers got a chance to fight for the middleweight title. Quiet guy from Georgia, the Georgia Deacon, very humble. He beat Harry Greb a couple of times. A little controversial, maybe the fights were, but good. But that was a good thing in a sense that a black man in the 1920s could get a controversial decision over a white guy. It's not actually a good. No one ever discusses that. That's actually a good thing in a way.
Sure.
You think it would be the other way all the time, which it usually was. But the heavyweight title, that was the main prize.
Right.
And Jack Johnson, some people feel Jack Johnson ruined it for the black fighters because he was selfish, not thinking of them. When you were the heavyweight champion back in that time, you were representing whoever. And Jack Johnson was representing the black race, black society at that time. There was no Major League Baseball players that were black. There was the NFL, what was it, non-existent. In the NBA, who heard that was a pipe dream? There was no NBA. So Jack Johnson was the main representative. And Jack Johnson did nothing wrong when you think of it in this day and age. He ran around with white women, which was a no-no back at the time. Today it's fine, do whatever the heck you want as long as you don't break a law, But so he would do these things that were completely out of the box, and he could get away with it to an extent. Finally, he was forced out of the country, in this thing called the Mann Act, and because he got married to a white woman, he took her across state lines. Supposedly, it was a charge. And Donald Trump, when he was president, he'll be a president again, but when he was president the first time around, he pardoned Jack Johnson. Actually, Senator John McCain worked for years and years to initiate it. Senator John McCain begged Barack Obama to pardon Jack Johnson, and Obama wouldn't do it. I mean, you'd think Obama would have done it, but Obama maybe figured Jack Johnson's been gone so long, and Obama didn't want to give out pardons easily. And Obama would have to be asked why he didn't. I haven't recalled anyone asking Obama why, but McCain was confident before he put the proposal on Obama's desk. He said, this president is going to pardon Jack Johnson, feeling because Obama's black, he'll feel the injustice. But Trump did it not because so much it was a social injustice. Don't get me wrong. He did it in large part because Sylvester Stallone appealed to him. And Trump liked the idea of having, being buddies with Sylvester Stallone. So there he was in the Oval Office with Sylvester Stallone, the WBC president, Jose Sullivan, Lennox Lewis, Deontay Wilder, a relative of Jack Johnson's, and Trump signed the pardon now. Which bottom line, it was a good thing, He wasn't a criminal what he did, but
there's always
lost the title in Cuba to Jess Willard, Jack Johnson. And then eventually he was allowed to come back to the United States, but had to serve some jail time. That was part of the condition. Yeah.
There's always multiple reasons of doing things. I remember Donald Trump would give the Medal of Honor to a lot of sports figures too. He was good for that too. But anyway,
Mariano Rivera got the Medal of Honor. Yeah, Moses.
There was a lot of them.
His friend, because
he's a big sports guy.
Bill Russell got the Medal of Honor. I mean, to me, the Medal of Honor in general, have you done anything outside of sports? Or have what you've done in sports been so influential that it impacted people outside of the arena, the stadium? I'm not, I'm not sure. I mean, it's with certain athletes. I mean, that's a nice debate. I never want to minimize what someone has done.
Right.
I mean, like Bill Russell, did he really do a lot outside of the arena? People respected Bill Russell because he spoke his mind. But it is speaking your mind about injustices enough in itself to get, Congressional Medal of Honor. Should you have had to have done certain other things, been really heavily involved in other causes? It's something up for discussion.
Yeah, definitely. And because people get a little upset when athletes they don't overstep their boundaries, but talk about something else but the sport today too. So I mean, you make enemies either way, I guess. So
now, let me tell you, things evolve in society very quickly. You're going to see. I don't know, will I be around to see it, but a lot of decades down the line, or whatever, Colin Kaepernick is going to be honored by, but given maybe a congressional medal of freedom, something, because he was the most hated guy when he did it, but years later, society will evolve and they're going to recognize, what a courageous act.
It's possible.
That's my prediction.
It's possible. So, folks, we have a new at least they're organizing a professional women's baseball league coming to you in 2026. Thank you. Yeah, we already passed 2006. So anyway, so 2026, and they're trying to get support right now to get this thing up and going. And this here is a picture of what it looked like way back when. And if you pay real close attention to it, you see the bat is kind of long and thin, and the baseball is kind of big. Well, back then, folks, and this wasn't in the movie, The League of Their Own, it was basically, when it first started in 43, 44, a hybrid softball game where the ball was about 12 inches, a lot bigger than a baseball that's, I think, 9 3/4 inches. And the teams that are projected to go in 2026 are up here in the Northeast. The teams that were back then were back in the Midwest. Now, remember, this is 1943, 44 to 54, where in the early part, World War II was happening. So even though players were going over to fight, whether it was in Europe or whether it was in Asia or wherever, they still had male baseball players playing at that time. So there wasn't really a need or a want for any other different kind of baseball, really. But in the Midwest, they really don't have any teams. In fact, they pretty much still don't have any teams out there except the minor leagues. And this is what I'm kind of comparing the women's professional baseball league back then to. It's a minor league where it's a fun day for the family. They all go out and they watch baseball. So in the Midwest, it was pretty successful for a time. They had 10 teams out there, as I said, from 1943 to 1954. Over 600 women played in this league. And at the time, there was no MLB teams in the Midwest, like I said. The Rockford Peaches won 4 championships. The league peaked at over 900,000 spectators. A lot of people went to see these games. It was originally owned by Wrigley gum mogul Arthur Meyer, who, of course, was Wrigley Spearmint Gum, and he had a promotions department back then, and he would use his promotions department to get these ladies out on different magazines. For instance, they were featured in Time, Life, 17, Newsweek magazines, some of the big magazines in the country. He would feature these women. The publicist after him bought the team, and his name was Arthur Mayhoff, who owned the league for a few years. Again, a guy with a lot of money that could spend on these girls and these teams. When it started dying out, about from 51 to 54, teams were individually owned. So we know once you start asking women, the teams to start paying to play a little bit, it's got its way out. So in 54 was the last year. The mound was only 40 feet from home plate. Overhand was started to be allowed in 1948 when the ball shrank to 10 3/4. The last year of the league, the ball was regular size. The uniforms and the requirements to play in this were pretty crazy. At the beginning, the women were getting. Let me see if I can get you the exact money here. The women were getting between $45 to $75 a week at that time to play. On top of that, they had to go to a charm school, believe it or not. Arthur Meyerhoff was not Arthur Meyerhoff. Let me get to it. No real lipstick. Rubenstein, sorry, charm school. They had to go to learn proper etiquette. They also there was a dress code. Each girl had to wear a short sleeve dress. It could be no more than 3 inches up from the top of the knee. They had to wear lipstick at all times. They couldn't have short hair. In fact, one woman got kicked out because she cut her hair short. She got kicked out of the league. So there was a demanding, not only were you, a ball player, but you also had to maintain a certain type of sexuality or certain kind of feminism to play in this league. So, as I said, they always wore lipstick. So, guys, question for you. How do you think this 2026, if this happens, how successful do you think it's going to be?
WNBA is a little sketch. So, I don't know. I don't know. The way things are going in society right now, I'm not sure. I just think it makes sense. We're talking about the final, talk about the movie A League of Their Own. I think that made things possible. I didn't even know that happened until I watched the movie, with history. And so it made it more interesting to find out about that was real. And I'm thinking, well, why not? They pro league, but I'm not. WNBA is just really financially not great at all.
I hate to be negative, but I don't see it going anywhere. It's a regular baseball league. It's not a softball league.
Right.
A large part of the problem is we have so much sports going on now, so much entertainment, and even outside of sports, there's a certain amount of entertainment that people like to watch: the news, movies, this, that. And we're throwing one more thing at them. Look, pickleball just took off as something really, really popular for people to play themselves, okay? But pickleball is a spectator sport. Do we really care about it? People like ping pong, do we care about it as a spectator sport? And there are a lot of other great sports that haven't really taken off. People enjoy track and field, which is popular within a certain community, a track and field community. It's pretty popular. But to the average sports fan, they would have heard of Noah Lyles, for example. But, how many people watch Noah Lyles race, when you think of that? Yeah. And compare, okay, let's compare to the WNBA. The WNBA is making some inroads slowly, okay? Because Caitlin Clark burst on the scene with Angel Reese and the whole bit. So people are watching more than before. But even then, Mac, as you pointed out, they're still losing money.
Yeah.
But at least they're a form of entertainment in certain towns that people are going to come to the games. It's like family entertainment. The WNBA is more family entertainment than it is sports entertainment. For example, the Knicks on NBA team, that's more sports entertainment where the family goes to enjoy it, perhaps. But the WNBA, that's considered more family thing. I mean, the Liberty won the title. It was good. They had their thing in New York. But sports fans across the United States, I mean, they're oblivious to the Liberty winning the title.
Well, let me ask you something. Women's boxing has taken off a little bit, right? You agree with that?
No, I don't agree with that.
You don't think it's become more popular, Jack?
Not really, Mac. Not really at all. You want to know something? I'm not an authority on boxing. You want to know why? You asked me who's the women's heavyweight champion. I'm drawing a blank right now. Who?
All right. Okay.
I don't know the champions in a different way. I know some of the fighters. Okay, for example, I know on the Mike Tyson Jake Paul show, there's a heck of a female fight. Katie Taylor, Amanda Serrano, the rematch. I'm very familiar with those two, extremely familiar. But and I'm familiar with certain female fighters, but I'm not familiar with the weight divisions, to this, to that. It's like a short list of female fighters who we know, but it's all in all, you put them on a show, it's more entertaining to fight, but we're not sure what's at stake. But with the men, we know weight divisions, we know the contenders coming up. It's hard because there's so much going on. I mean, the other sports, there's golf, for example, it's horse racing. Yeah. I mean, I think a women's league could be good as far as family entertainment. We got minor league baseball guys. Right. We don't know minor league baseball who's winning championships. Maybe people in the small towns do. I mean, James, I don't think you could tell who is the AA champion, who is the Penn League champion, in the minor leagues. I mean,
yeah, the only people that pay attention to, as you said, people that don't have Major League Baseball teams in their state. We got the Hartford Yard Goats. That's broadcast and it's on TV a lot. And we know, I don't know, but people know where they place in every year, whether they get the playoffs or not. The only way I know is because I see a clip, from the local sports station. So.
Mac, I'll give you a comparison. When the men's NCAA basketball tournament's going on, isn't the women's tournament going on at the same time? And yes. I mean, this sounds bad to say, outside of people who, family members, relatives, friends, I mean, the general public is only paying attention to the men's tournament, per se. It's a little different in some of the other women's sports. The women's national soccer team, if they're playing in the Olympics, they garner attention, maybe even more than the men, figure skating. The women figure skaters in the Winter Olympics are going to garner, I believe, more attention than the men. But a new women's league, it's a good, don't get me wrong, it's a good thing if it helps women get involved in sports. I think it's a very good thing. But as far as making inroads and becoming very popular to the average sports fan, that's all I'm talking about here. I think it is a wonderful thing that they get the opportunity to play baseball the same way men do. But and I hope their sponsors to the players could get good salaries because they certainly would deserve it. But how popular is it going to be to the average sports fan? That's all I'm talking about and nothing else.
Well, let me ask you too a pretty controversial question. So we got all these women's sports, and you of course, not all of them. All these girls are going to make it to become professional in any sports. I don't have the percentages. I know what it is. Men, college, only 3% of the men make it into football. To even get to football, I'm not even saying that they continue playing. Just getting drafted and getting in or signing a contract. Does this hurt women in the long run? I mean, is this something that, fathers and daughters or mother and daughters, are they talking about this? Hey, listen, why are you going to the WNBA? Why are you becoming a women's boxer? Why not become a scientist? Why not become whatever? I mean, I imagine these discussions are held with men too. You know what I mean? But I mean, I'm just asking you too, does this hurt the upcoming girls that become women?
No, I don't think so, because you have to consider NIL. a lot of these kids are making money at that level now. I mean, more money than they make in the pros. We're talking about WNBA. Caitlin Clark was making way more money in college than she is making money right now.
That's one girl though. That's one woman.
Yeah. Talk about the average WNBA player. What are they making a year? And they're playing for love of game, a lot of the girls,
They are.
which is really good. You know, as long as they can make a living, I mean, and how many of them are going to have these great careers otherwise? I mean, Mackie's saying a scientist. I remember when I was going for my master's degree, I had this kinesiology course. We had to demonstrate and talk about certain anatomy, this and that. And I was talking about boxing, you know, the elbow, the jab, or whatever. I don't remember specifically. But the teacher was a woman, was totally against boxing, thought it should be abolished, this and that. And she was saying, and I was saying, well, what else are some of these guys going to do? You know, I just asked the question, and she said, they can become businessmen. And the guy next to me, I'll never forget, elbowed me, and he said, could you imagine smoking Joe Frazier with a suit and tie, cutting a big business deal? And I was like cracking up.
That is funny.
Well, you want everyone to have other careers, other trades. Don't get me wrong. And some of them could be very successful in whatever. This isn't a put down. It's oversaturation. If we didn't, you want to know why the League of Their Own was popular? For one reason and one reason only, and this is the evidence, because Major League Baseball was, correct me if I'm wrong, Mac, was taking a little bit of a hiatus because some of the guys went off to war. So they had an opportunity. But once all the guys were back and Major League Baseball was back full force, people wouldn't go to the games. Same thing, we talked about the Negro leagues before a little bit, you know, boxing and baseball. Eventually, when the great black players went to the major leagues, you know, the Negro leagues weren't getting the attendance, and they kind of folded. It wasn't a racist thing to fold the Negro leagues. It was supply and demand. The product wasn't as good anymore because the Willie Mazes and Roy Campanellas would be going. Jackie Robinson obviously would be going to the major leagues.
Great point. And as you said, now World War II just didn't take Major League Baseball players. It took minor league baseball players too. Maybe the minor league baseball players, maybe they were gone. I mean, maybe the teams didn't have enough to field, and this is why this grew. I mean, it's all about what timing and you know what's available, and I think that's why it was big for those couple of years. But hey, listen, I give them credit. They went out there and they did their things for at least they were very successful, as I said, for a couple of years during the war. So I mean, they are in the Hall of Fame. The league is in the Baseball Hall of Fame, of course. I think that happened like in 1991, if I'm not mistaken. But they did eventually get into the Baseball Hall of Fame too. So you know, I mean, I listen. I thought the movie was great, and of course, it's based off fact kind of, but there's a lot more stuff thrown in there than fact. But anyway, so we won't get to Roger Staubach, Roger the Dodger, Captain Comeback, the Hail Mary, first Hail Mary passing. Guy from Dallas, but we will talk about him next week. Thanks for all the views. We had a lot of views in and out. Rick, thanks for making some comments. Tomorrow, the big football show where we will go through and listen, it's the best football show on the air for any Sunday morning. I mean, I'll put us up against ESPN. It doesn't matter. Our show is more entertaining. It has a lot more stuff than they do. So anyway, folks, have a great Saturday. If you're going out, stay out of trouble. We'll see you tomorrow. Jack, I'll see you Monday, correct?
Yeah.
All right. Have a good one, folks. We'll see you soon.